All right, so we are continuing this series. Thank you so much. We are continuing in this series that we started a few weeks ago called Everyone is a Time Traveler. And the whole idea behind this series is we are sort of acknowledging the odd relationship that each of us has with time, in that we all have a past. We all have a collection of memories and experiences that have in one way or another shaped who we are and what has led us to now. So we all have things that happened before today that have made us who we are. We also have a present, which is what exactly is happening right now. We've all seen A Christmas Carol. We know how these three things work. And then we have we all have, hopefully, a future in which things that haven't happened yet will eventually occur. And so we all sort of live inside of this tension of we remember the past, we exist inside of the present, and we are constantly moving and kind of barreling towards the future, whether we like it or not. And so we are all kind of living in this space of time, and we all have to sort of deal with like each of these dimensions in a way that makes sense and is healthy and is reflective of maybe who we were created to be. And so far, what we've done throughout the series is we've talked about how we think about what has happened, which we did several weeks ago. I've lost track of time, interestingly enough. And so we talked, when we started the series, we talked about what has happened. We talked about our relationship with the past. In the last time we gathered together 2 weeks ago, Ashley talked about sort of how we engaged now, how we engage whatever is happening right now in our present moment, in the current present thing that is happening right now. And so today we are very predictably, we are going into a conversation about how do we think about what hasn't happened yet? How do we think about what is ahead of us that we don't necessarily know exactly what that's going to look like? So all of that will lead us into, obviously, John chapter 20. You saw it coming. I know it's super predictable that we were going to talk about John 20. Just joking, sorry. So in John 20, what's going on is you have this is a part of the resurrection story of Jesus. So in other words, the setup here is that a few chapters or a chapter earlier, Jesus was executed by the Roman Empire. And he has been dead. He is on the third day of having been dead. And so in this story, there's a woman named Mary Magdalene who was a friend of Jesus's previous to his execution. And so Mary Magdalene, in John's account, is the only person visiting Jesus's tomb. And so in the story that we're being told in this particular version, Mary is visiting Jesus's tomb, and she is realizing very quickly that the tomb is empty. Jesus's body is not there. But she doesn't know why yet. All she knows is that I came to visit his tomb yesterday and it was here, and now I'm back and the tomb is empty. And I don't know exactly why that is. And so in John chapter 20, verse 11, it says, "Now Mary stood outside the tomb crying. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb, and she saw two angels in white seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. They asked her, 'Woman, why are you crying?' They have taken," which is a funny thing to ask when someone's standing at a tomb. "So why are you crying?" "They have taken my Lord away," she said, "and I don't know where they have put him." At this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not realize that it was Jesus. He asked her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it that you were looking for?" Thinking he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned toward him and cried out in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. And we talked several weeks ago about sort of like the history of that word. So she now recognizes Jesus for who he is. And Jesus says the weirdest thing a person could possibly say in this very strange circumstance. Jesus says, "Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and to your God." Mary Magdalene went to the disciples with the news, "I have seen the Lord." And she told them that she had, and she told them that he had said these things to her. So there's a lot going on here. It's a very, this is a story we've heard over and over and over again at Easter time. So there's a lot going on, but we're going to focus on one particular element of this. But before we get to that, it's really important to understand Mary has spent years following Jesus. Mary has spent lots and lots of time engaging with and traveling with what Jesus is doing in the world. So she would have known him very well. And we tend to only think of, when we talk about Jesus' disciples, we tend to think of the 12 male disciples, like the core group of male disciples. But we often miss, if you look at other stories, you realize, oh, there's more disciples than just these 12. These 12 just happen to hold a special like place in the story, but there are also other disciples who are in the inner circle, and several of them are women, and one of them is Mary Magdalene. And so clearly, Jesus and Mary have developed a connection after years of traveling and with her learning from Jesus every single day for years and years. And at this moment in John's version of the story, again, she's the only person who's visiting Jesus's tomb. So the loss of him has impacted her in a very profound way. And so when she sees that Jesus is not dead, Jesus has the strangest response. When she recognizes this is Jesus and he's not dead, his response in verse 17 is, do not hold on to me. Why would Jesus say this? What in the world, of all the things to say to somebody who realizes that you're not dead? That's an odd thing to say to a person. And then he tells her to go tell more people about what she has seen. So of all the things for Jesus to say, why does he start with, do not hold on to me? So there's a lot going on here, and there are, I'm sure, psychologists who could talk more about sort of the dimensions of how the human mind processes and deals with grief. But one dimension of grief is that when a person dies, you don't just lose that person. It's not just that this person was here and now they're not anymore. You also lose all of your hopes and expectations and ideas about what the world was going to look like with that person in it. You know what I mean? And so it's like all of the things that you project onto this person, all of the things that you hoped you would experience alongside with this person or under this person's leadership, all of a sudden, all of those things have gone away. So all of your expectations about what the world will look like with that person in it have ended. And that's part of the grieving process. It's just sort of the realization that this narrative I thought I was a part of, it's not happening anymore. So up to this point in the story, not only has Jesus died, but everyone's assumptions and expectations about Jesus have died as well. So upon the realization that Jesus is not dead, is it possible that Mary, in this moment, believes that everything can just go back to the way that they were before? You know what I mean? So, like, in other words, so we thought Jesus was dead. He apparently is not. So now, can we just make it the way it was before we thought Jesus was dead? Can we go back to the way it used to be? So before Jesus died, there was this assumption that Jesus was going to lead an uprising and drive out the Roman Empire. We talked about this a lot, but in this time in the Judean territory, the Roman Empire had fully conquered and overburdened the Judean people with military presence and taxes, and a lot of kind of not just hostility, but intimidation in terms of like, if you get out of line, it's going to cost you. And so the Roman Empire had sort of created like this atmosphere of tension and fear. And the assumption was one day, and this is the word Messiah, quite often at this time was used to talk about one day a revolutionary figure will rise up, will come up from within our ranks, and will lead a revolution that will push the Romans back out, and we will have our country back to the way we wanted it before. And so that was the assumption, is that we will take our country back from the Romans once the true Messiah has risen up. And so when Jesus dies, the assumption is we backed the wrong horse, basically. We were on the wrong track to believe that Jesus was actually going to lead this kind of revolution. But now Mary is seeing Jesus, and I'm sure part of the mental calculus going on is, oh, the revolution is still on. Like we are still moving in that direction. And Jesus's first word to her is, hold on, do not hold on to me. Let's take a minute and check our assumptions about what we assume is going to happen next. So don't hold on to me is don't assume that things were just going to go back to the way they used to be. Don't return to the things that you were expecting prior to all of this happening. Do not expect the whole thing to just be some previous idyllic state of being that we were used to before. So when Jesus says don't hold on to me, it's more than just like, because you assume like she's going in for like a hug or some sort of physical contact, and Jesus saying don't hold on to me, you could take that as like a like hold on, I'm just recently resurrected. I'm not ready for like hugs and stuff. But or it might be more of a like, okay, all the things that you thought about we're going to happen here, let's not just assume that it's just gonna like hit the reset button and we're going back to the way it was. So that is the immediate, like the in the immediate aftermath of the resurrection. So then we're gonna jump over to the book of Acts, chapter 1. So in Acts chapter 1, this is a few weeks later, and you have sort of Jesus giving kind of like his final verbal vision to his followers of, okay, here's what's about to happen. In a post-resurrection world, this is what we're going to do. So in Acts chapter 1, verse 4, it says, on one occasion, while he, Jesus, was eating with them, he gave them this command: do not leave Jerusalem, but wait for the gift my Father promised, which you have heard me speak about. For John, he's referring to John the Baptist, John baptized with water, but in a few days, you will be baptized with the Holy Spirit, which is a cryptic, weird thing to just say to a person while you're sharing a meal. So throughout the four Gospels, the Gospel narrative, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, there are in the Bible, there are four different books that account the life of Jesus: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We often refer to these as Gospels. So throughout the four Gospel narratives, the trajectory of the whole story is moving towards Jerusalem. Especially if you look through the book of Mark, Mark is almost like he is obsessed with Jesus getting to Jerusalem. Every story ends or begins with on their way to Jerusalem, while they were headed to Jerusalem. Everybody's moving into Jerusalem. So because at this moment, during the pre-death and resurrection version of Jesus' life, everything is moving towards Jerusalem. So now, at this point in the book of Acts, all of that has happened. The big events in Jerusalem have occurred. The death and resurrection of Jesus have come and gone. And now Jesus says, at first, I want everyone to stay in Jerusalem, which totally makes sense because, again, they're expecting a revolution. They're expecting this notion of, okay, we're going to take back our country. We're going to push the Romans out. Jerusalem is the seat of power here. So the whole thing is probably going to start in Jerusalem. So now Jesus says, okay, first, I do want you to stay in Jerusalem. Then he says, there is a new element entering the story, which he refers to as the Holy Spirit, which we do not have time to unpack what all that looks like. So he said, basically he's saying there is a new thing entering into the story that has not been part of our active vocabulary up to this point, which leads to all sorts of assumptions about, okay, well then if that's what's going to happen, what happens next? So then in verse 6, it says, then they gathered around him and asked, Lord, are you at this time going to restore the kingdom to Israel? Which again is exactly what would have been expected at this time. What they're asking is, okay, so now we're getting down to business, right? Like we are going to get rid of the Romans and we're going to have our country back. So the assumption, again, is that Jesus is going to force all of these like outsiders and the hostile military presence out of this space, and then we will have our country back the way we want it. And then we can insulate and close ranks, and we can be exactly who we used to be before all of these outsiders came in and started messing with our way of life. In other words, can we just go back to the good old days? Can we please? I'm sure in the imagination of the people, there was a time and place, or a time in history when, oh, this is exactly the way it was. Like, you can probably pinpoint exactly, okay, back when we had a strong military and an independent king and like strong, healthy, like cultural identity, that's the way we want it to be. When we weren't being corrupted or conquered or taken over by anybody outside of us. So can we just go back to that? Can we please go back to the way it used to be? Can we please just go back to the good old days? And then in verse 7, it says, Jesus, said to them, it is not for you to know the time or the dates the Father has set by his own authority, but you will receive power when, again, the Holy Spirit comes on you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth. So to summarize, they ask, can we just go back? Can we just make it the way it was? Can we go back to the way it used to be? And Jesus gives a two-pronged answer. The first part of Jesus' answer is, okay, first of all, stop expecting me to give you details about how the future is going to unfold. The future remains an intangible unknown. Basically, bless you, is what Jesus is saying. That's the first part of his answer. And then the second part of his answer is, but here's what I will tell you. This whole thing is going to start something new in Jerusalem. And then it's going to get bigger. It's going to expand into Judea, Judea is just the surrounding territory around Jerusalem. And then he says, and then Samaria, which is a part of the territory that used to be a part of the Judean territory, used to be a part of Israel, but because of other like military conflicts in history, had kind of broken off and stopped being a part of them. So Jesus says, okay, it's going to start in Jerusalem. It's going to move out, and it's going to go through all of Judea. Then it's going to expand into Samaria, which is a territory that used to be a part of us, but isn't anymore. And then Jesus says, and to the ends of the earth, which is a lot farther than where our borders might take us. So in the first century, by the way, the ends of the earth isn't just some random thing that somebody would say to assume, like, as far as you can imagine. It was that, but there's actually a more specific thing going on here. In first century consciousness, especially for countries that were conquered by the Roman Empire, the ends of the earth specifically refer to the city of Rome. Have you ever heard the expression, all roads lead to Rome? Yeah. So the assumption is, okay, not only are we not just like washing our hands and getting rid of the Romans, we are actually going to take what we are doing and we're going to like make the Romans more a part of it. So, which is fully subversive against what everybody is expecting. So when Jesus says, and we're going to take this to the ends of the earth, he's saying we're not quite done with the Romans just yet. So it's kind of a way of talking about like the source of like global like commerce and power, and just sort of the energy that flows through like the main seat of power in the world. So the disciples are asking, can we just get the Romans out of here? Can we please just go back to the way it used to be? Can we just make the whole thing smaller again? And so the disciples have an inward focused, like kind of shrinking idea about what the future is supposed to look like. Can we just make it the way it used to be? They want the future to look quite a bit like the past. But Jesus says, no, because not only are we going to resist the urge to make things smaller and to rid ourselves of anybody who isn't just like us, we are actually going to make the whole thing so much bigger. For Jesus, the future was never supposed to be an echo of the past. For Jesus, the future was never supposed to be just a copy of a thing that has already happened. Resurrection is not the same thing as doing everything just all over again. Resurrection is about new life. Resurrection is about a new chapter in the story. So Jesus invites his followers to move forward in a future that will never, ever look exactly like the past. And so again, like we talked about at the beginning earlier, we all sort of exist inside this like paradoxical like point in time, in which we remember and are like deeply shaped by the past. The past is not insignificant. The past is truly significant because without the past, we would not be who we are. Your memories and your experiences have led you to this moment. So we live in this paradox of we remember and are shaped by the past, and we remain fully present in the present, and we keep moving forward into the future, and we're doing all of that at the exact same time. And so the future can be really scary, is the thing. And we see this kind of in the mindset of the disciples, right? The future is, if the future doesn't look like the past, then we don't know what to expect. It's an unknown. Therefore, it's pretty scary. This is one of the reasons people keep asking Jesus if they can go back to the way it used to be, because the past makes sense to us. We tend to idealize the past in all kinds of ways. We tend to assume the way it used to be was the best version of things that possible. Therefore, the best thing we can do is just make it the way it was. In fact, you see this. This is not the only time you see this. You see this all the time throughout the scriptures. Look at Exodus chapter 16. So in Exodus, and we could spend all day. We won't, but we could spend all day looking at different. You're welcome. We could spend all day looking at different stories in which this kind of thing shows up. The Exodus story, I think, is one of the most human stories in this part of it, just because of how people react to a thing that they had always wanted. So in Exodus chapter 16, what you have this group of people who were until very recently enslaved by the people of Egypt. And so they have very recently, through a guy named Moses, been freed by God, and now they are no longer slaves. But the thing is, they also haven't reached their ultimate destination. They do not yet have a country of their own, but they're not slaves in the country where they used to live. So they're in this kind of liminal in-between space in which things aren't the way they used to be, but they're not quite the way they're going to be. And so they're actively moving towards an unknown future. And so, again, when you live in kind of this liminal space of, okay, it's not the way it was, but it isn't the way it's going to be, so who are we now? So in Exodus chapter 16, verse 1, It says this. It says the whole Israelite community set out for Elim and came to the desert of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after they had come out of Egypt. So it's been about 2.5 months or so since they were freed from slavery. So in verse 2, it says, in the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. Aaron is Moses' brother. And then in verse 3, it says, the Israelites said to them, to Moses and Aaron, if only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us out into the desert to starve this entire assembly to death. This is, and we look at this and we think, like, this is insanity. Because, like, before they were freed from enslavement, there's some horrific stories about, like, babies being taken out of their mother's hands and being killed in order to prevent the people from getting too numerous. There are all kinds of stories about people being starved as a form of intimidation and punishment. And so all kinds of stories about people, like, groaning and crying out for liberation and freedom. And now they have it. And they're saying, oh, but we're short on food. So it would have been better if we had just died as slaves in Egypt. What in the world? And again, we bristle against the story, but is this not the most human story you've ever heard in the scriptures? Because it is possible to look back at even the worst parts of our past and still, like, weirdly kind of long for it, because at least we understood it. You know what I mean? Like, there are so many different scenarios in which we might look back at something in our past, and we know that thing was killing us. And we know that was a bad situation that we did not need to be in. But we long for it because at least it made sense to us. So, in fact, there is, and again, there are people with advanced psychological degrees who can talk more about this. But it is not uncommon for a person in an abusive relationship to stay in that relationship way past when they realize this needs to end. I cannot maintain. This is not sustainable. I cannot live like this. This may eventually actually kill me if I don't get out of it. But they stay anyway, long after it becomes unsafe. Why? Because the unknown future is often scarier than the terrible circumstances that we already understand. And so we stay in situations that actually are actively harming us, even though we know that that's what's happening. But at least we understand it. There's all sorts of art and music and stories about this. The one I always sort of think of is from the theologian Eddie Vedder, who it's Pearl Jam. There's a Pearl Jam song called Better Man. And that's the whole song is from the perspective of a woman in a toxic relationship. And the refrain in the chorus is she lies and says she's in love with him because she believes she can't find a better man. And so I'm sure Pearl Jam was not on your church bingo card today. So but that's again, it gets to the heart of this reality of we would rather stay in a thing that is harmful than move into an unknown future thing that we don't fully understand. So in Ecclesiastes chapter 7, which is one of it's part of a writing known as the wisdom literature. And so in Ecclesiastes chapter 7, you have this wisdom writer who is kind of talking about what are some ways that we tend to actually sabotage ourselves in which we look through the lens of what's happening, and we tend to sort of interpret it, and we kind of get lost in the weeds of, well, maybe this is actually harmful if we continue to see it through this lens. So in Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 10, it says, do not say, why were the old days better than these? For it is not wise to ask such questions. So, that's about as straightforward as it gets, is it not? Do not, like, look at things and say, like, oh, things were just better before. It was just so much better before we got to this point. And maybe in some ways it was. Like, there are certainly times and seasons in our lives when we think, like, oh my gosh, we are going through it right now. But that does not necessarily mean that we should idealize and essentially attempt to return to an already foregone past. So it is easy to look back at certain chapters in our lives and assume, well, that was the best it could be. That's the best we could do. So that's the way it should. That's where we should go back to. And so again, looking through it through the lens of the disciples, The disciples just want to go backwards. They just want to make things smaller. They want to close it off, and they want to say, what if we made the story, what if we shrunk the story down to the size that we already understand, and we go backwards, and that will make more sense to us. And but conversely, Jesus wants to move things forward, and he wants things to continuously grow and expand in all kinds of unexpected ways. The disciples want the story to get smaller and go backwards. Jesus wants the story to go forward and get bigger and bigger. And it's easy to look back at a previous time and assume it was better, and that the future by nature is just going to always be worse. And we see this again. We see this every single day, right? This is how, like, there is a feature in your social media app that will show you pictures of things that happened, like, on this day in other times. How easy is it? And it's great to, like, have memories. Again, our memories shape us. Our memories create, like, a world in which we understand who we are. But it's also this thing of, like, how many of us, we look at these pictures and we think, like, oh my gosh, it would just be so great if we could just go back and have it be that way again. And again, you see this in all kinds of dimensions. You see this in parenting all the time. How many of us, like, we look at pictures, or we talk about our kids, and there is this, and my kids are always complaining, like, the only thing adults seem to understand, the only thing adults can think to say to them is, like, oh, you look taller. You know what I mean? Like that's it, because in my imagination, you are short, and now I'm looking at you in reality, and you're tall, and that's confusing to my brain. And so, anyway, that was a public service announcement just for my kids. But we see this a lot in parenting. In fact, I remember a couple of years ago, I was listening to a podcast interview with a woman who I can't remember her name, but she writes a lot about parenting, and she was telling the podcast, the interviewer, she was saying, my daughter, she said, we're in the second year of my daughter being a teenager. And the interviewer said, oh, how's that going? As if to expect, like, oh, this must be like everybody thinks, like, teenager, that must be really hard. And she said, how's that going? And I love this woman's response. She said, it's amazing. She said, she said, I've never had more fun as a parent. She said, yeah, when she was smaller, she was funny, and she was cute, and she was easy to like pick up and move if you needed her to. It's not, but then there's also, but now that she's 14, it's like, oh, we can like have conversations. And she will, and sometimes, like, on the best days, she lets me, like, participate in stuff that's going on in her life. And she said, it's amazing. She said, I've never had more fun. And I thought, like, that is a refreshing way to talk about parenting a teenager, is it not? Because we often think, you often hear parents of teenagers talk about, like, oh, it's just so much easier before they learned how to, like, get sarcastic and and have opinions. But there's also sort of this newness of, yeah, but look at who they're becoming. Like, this is kind of a gift. This is kind of a beautiful thing, but it's also a thing that I've never experienced with this person before. And so it's a little bit scary. And so we see this dimension, again, in parenting. You see it in a whole lot in the world of churches. Like, the number of us, I'm sure, who grew up in churches in which, like, any kind of change at all was the most terrifying thing you could possibly imagine. In fact, I grew up in a Baptist church, and my former youth pastor, who also was at this Baptist church, I remember he would always tell this joke. He would say, how many baptists does it take to change a light bulb? And the answer is change. And it's like, that was, it's funnier. I'm sorry. I thought it was funny. It's funnier than you made it seem, I think, but maybe I didn't tell it right. Anyway, so but you see this in the world of church, like, all the time, right? Any sort of, like, next thing that we've never done before, but that's not how we do it. That's not how we've ever done it before. And it becomes really, really scary, because we sort of live and die by how things have always been, or how we used to do things. And Jesus is very clearly saying, like, no, the whole thing is never supposed to be a backwards looking sort of repeat of the past. It's always meant to be looking and moving forward. If your only reason for doing something is that's just the way you've always done it, that's a terrible reason for doing something. Like, you need a better reason than just, like, well, that's just how we've always done it. That's how, that's just the way. And so, and again, we could talk all day about, like, all the different dimensions in which we see sort of this idealization of the past, and this, like, this fear-oriented way of looking at the future. You see it a lot in, like, political movements. If you look at lots of political campaigns throughout history. Like there is always like an impulse among certain political candidates to, and this is not just for now, this is always, there has always been an impulse to say things like, a thing that you care about is changing. And if you vote for me, I will stop it from changing. And I will make it the way it used to be, which was the way that you liked it before. So just vote for me, and I will preserve the thing that you always wanted to be preserved. And I will do my best to resist the future from happening, basically. So, and that has forever been an effective political tool. You see it in like work cultures. I met a guy one time at a conference. It's a guy named Tim, and I love this story. And Tim, Tim's job is to go and speak. He does like corporate speaking, and one of his jobs is to go into corporations and kind of like or kind of like dislodge them from being kind of stuck in one place. And he got hired, and he would not tell me what company this was, but he was telling me the story. It was a long time. He said he got hired by a company, a pretty well-known company, according to him, that had changed their logo. And the CEO had contacted Tim and said, listen, this is going to sound weird. We changed our logo and people are getting really upset about it. And they're not handling it well. Can you please come in and help us like get into like the new logo is happening. We had to change the logo for all kinds of reasons. We're not going back to the old logo. Will you please come in and help my people just get on board with the new logo? And so Tim comes in and he said, what I decided to do was, I decided we're going to have a funeral for the old logo. And he said, and no kidding, they had like the logo up on a stage with like black drapes around it. And they had people come up who had been with the company for a long time and talk about what the logo meant to them and like eulogize the logo. And then at the end, they had like pallbearers like take the logo down and out of the room. And he said, and I'm laughing while he's telling me the story. And I was like, this sounds insane. And he said, yeah, it's ridiculous. He said, but that CEO called me several weeks later and he was like, that worked. He said, like, I couldn't tell you why. He said, but psychologically, whatever it was that people were holding on to that was attached to the old logo, he said that, for the most part, that really did the trick. But what we had to do was we had to take a minute and acknowledge, like, we are not in the world of the old logo anymore. We are in the world of the new logo. And we appreciate all the things that the old logo did for us, but the old logo is gone. It is the old logo has died. May we all remember fondly the old logo. And so, but again, it's this notion of like, yeah, we tend to idealize the thing that we knew and that we understood. And Jesus is constantly saying like, yeah, don't hold on to that, because we are in a story that is constantly moving forward. And we should definitely honor and remember the past, but we can't go back, and we shouldn't try to go back. The story is always moving forward, and today cannot be just like yesterday. It was never supposed to be that way. And each day is its own thing. And if we spend all of our energy trying to recreate some mysterious past, we just get stuck. We just get kind of like lodged in place, and we never grow or move forward in any sort of way. And by the way, even if you could go back, you would be disappointed. And the reason is because you have changed. Even if nothing else had changed, you have changed. You are not the same person you were when that thing that happened that you loved so much happened. You are constantly being shaped and formed by the present. And every day you continue to evolve and grow as a person. I remember when I was a youth pastor, every single year we would have certain events throughout the year. We'd have like, camps and retreats. And at least every single year, at least one kid, and it was always a kid who was there for the second time. At least one kid would come up to me towards the end of whatever event it was and would be upset. And they would say, it just isn't the way it was last time. And look, these were camps put on by Baptists. They were exactly the way they were last time. Literally nothing had changed from year one to year two. But this kid has gotten older. And so the world has not changed at all. This kid has changed. This kid has had a whole new set of experience. He came in with expectations that it would feel just like it did the first time he was here, which is impossible. And so even if everything was the same, you wouldn't be the same, and it wouldn't feel the same. So even if you could go back, you would feel disappointed because going back doesn't change you. And so Jesus is sort of getting at this whole thing of like, yeah, we're always moving forward. And any attempt to not move forward, any attempt to move backwards is it is detrimental to us. It is harmful. It slows us down. It's actually not the way anything was supposed to go. In Matthew chapter 16, Jesus says this in verse 24. So Jesus said to his disciples, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. So Jesus uses this kind of metaphor of death and life and taking up your cross. And he says, maybe there are things that you've gotten very attached to, and you're having a hard time letting those things go, and you're having a hard time moving on. And what it really looks like to be alive is to acknowledge that, yeah, those things have come and gone. And we can grieve those things like an old logo, and we can acknowledge like what they meant to us, but also we have to keep moving forward. So again, going back to the parenting thing, maybe your kids are getting older, and that's bittersweet for you because that's exactly what they were supposed to do. But also you really got attached to who they used to be. And so there's this constant, almost kind of grieving process that we have to go through as parents over and over and over again as our kids constantly grow and change. And that's difficult. Or maybe you're in a job and you realize that job is killing you. It's bad for you. But the idea of changing jobs or trying something new is so scary. You'd rather stay in a thing that's actually harming you because at least you understand it. And maybe it is time for a change. Maybe there's something in your paradigm that's changing. Maybe you've had a sort of what we often refer to as a deconstruction season. Maybe you began asking new questions that have sort of changed the nature of how you think about faith and reality and life. And that's really scary because you thought you had a certain kind of understanding, and now it isn't that way anymore. And the problem is you can't go back. You can't unask the questions that you've asked. You can't unlearn the things that you've learned. And so moving forward and asking new questions and letting your point of view shift and grow and change, that can be really, really scary. Maybe your views, again, are on faith or reality are changing. And there's a part of you that thinks like, I wish I could just go back to the way I thought about everything when I was 16, when it all kind of made sense to me, when I was like doing like church youth group stuff and all that stuff was just the way it was. And now I'm a certain other age and it doesn't feel or look the way it used to. And that's scary to me. So when we're talking about resurrection and new life, we're talking about how we interact with the present and the future. And moving forward and engaging something new and beautiful is how we experience resurrection in our own lives. Resurrection, again, isn't just about hitting the reset button. Resurrection is about something new entering the world.